So Howard the Duck number 8, the presidential issue, is one of the big issues remembered from that era. But it was only one of many weird things that happened. Howard went to he goes to an insane asylum. He meets Kiss in what turns out to be something of a dream sequence, but still, Howard the Duck meets Kiss because it's 1977 and Kiss is everywhere, and Kiss is now in a licensed Marvel comic. It was the 70s, and then we come to the most infamous thing Steven Gerber ever wrote, and the most well-known issue of Howard the Duck, which is called issue number 16, The Dreaded Deadline Doom. Steve Gerber was a great guy. Many people who worked with him liked him as a person. As a professional, the man could not hit a deadline to save his life. I know people liked him because the person who had to deal with most of his deadline bullshit was Jim Shooter, editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics in the late 70s and early 80s, who has nothing but nice things to say about Steve Gerber, even when he's saying, my God, the man could not meet a deadline. Because he would say things like, I had to drag Steve into the office to write I had to watch him while I wrote it over the weekend, and then when he's done it, it's 22 pages of perfect copy. I don't know how he does it. Steve Gerber worked best under panic. And with Howard the Duck number 16, panic finally wasn't enough. He blows the deadline bad. There's no way they're getting an issue out on time. And they were big on getting issues out on time right around that time. So Gerber, I don't know who came up with the idea, but it's a genius idea. Gerber writes a bunch of essays about Howard the Duck and about himself. The primary topic of these essays is Howard the Duck yelling at Steve Gerber about how much he sucks.
Oh my God! I love it.
And he just says different. Sometimes it's just Howard talking about himself. It's 22 pages of Howard guiding Gerber through his own subconscious, and a different artist did every page or 2 pages, and that's how they know it on time. It's 22 pages of just crazy ass bullshit passed through Steve Gerber's head in the 24 hours.
There it is.
And
that artist.
It's a bunch. It's 22 different artists. Everyone does a page or 2 and does it in a weekend, and that's how they get the book out on time. And the damnable thing is, it is amazing writing. It is Hunter S. Thompson 1972 level of writing. Gerber is great. It's possibly the best thing Gerber ever wrote, and it's primarily Howard the Duck bitching at him for blowing his deadline. And when he's not doing that, he's bitching at him for how much Howard the Duck thinks his own book is terrible. Or at one point he just has a Vegas showgirl and a lampshade have a fight with an ostrich. Because it's comics and you have to have that page is literally called obligatory fight scene.
So. I mean, when in doubt, throw in a little bit of ridiculous obligatory fight scenes.
I remain in awe of that thing. I can't read it all at once because the essays are about 1,000 words each. They're printed in very tiny type on the pages. It's a freaking textbook.
That's incredible.
Oh my God!
That's absolutely incredible.
I had to.
Ridiculous.
I made a point of carving out space in this episode to talk specifically about that because it's insane. It is stupid. It is foolish. It shouldn't have worked. It had no right working, and it's the greatest thing Steve Gerber ever wrote in his life.
As a writer, I'm making a note to do this when I get writer's block. Just write shit with my characters yelling at me. I'm doing that next time I get writer's block. Thank you, Steve Gerber.
I'm going to take a moment to talk about one of Steve Gerber's other minor flaws. Gerber, when he was writing the book, he once again, it was on deadline. He was just coming up with whatever he could. He would just throw stuff against the wall and see what would stick. He wrote this Arabian Nights adventure, which was kind of bad and tacky, even by 1978 standards.
That is a low bar.
Other times he writes, the Howard the Duck presidential issue. And I love Steve Gerber with a passion. I've told this to his digital face. He is terrible at parodies. Every so often he got into his head to do a straight parody of something. Like he did a whole issue of Howard the Duck that was Star Wars with the Howard the Duck characters, and it was called Star Wah. I can't pronounce it. It was like whack or wah. It was basically the Howard the Duck's, duck sound. Star Wah. And sorry, it was awful.
It could have been amazing.
So what?
It could have been amazing.
It could have been amazing, but he was not good at doing these direct parodies. He's not Mel Brooks. He was trying to be Mel Brooks. God love you, Steve. Wherever you are, you're not Mel Brooks.
Everyone can be a Mel Brooks.
What Steve Gerber was good at was combining weird ideas. I'm going to take a moment here to talk about his second greatest creation, Dr. Bong. Speaking of drugs in the 1970s, Dr. Bong. Dr. Bong is Howard the Duck's arch nemesis. How he stole Howard's girlfriend and married his girlfriend and shows up numerous times over the rest of that book. Basically, he dominates the second half of the book and dominates the Howard the Duck revival 20 years later. He's this big supervillain with a bell for a head. I'm gonna cosplay this guy someday. If my wife has to take a flower pot and make it look like a bell, he's got a bell for a head and a big metal ball for a hand, and his superpower is.
Okay, so he's not that kind of Bong. He's the other kind of Bong. Okay.
Say what? He's what kind of Bong?
You said speaking of drugs, so I'm picturing a different kind of Bong.
Oh no, he's a bell. He is literally a bell that you ring, and his hand is a clapper, and his superpower is he hits his head and it goes bong, and it controls people's minds. The beauty of him is Dr. Bong is a disgraced journalist. He is Lester Bangs from the 1970s, but with no ethics, who writes stories to make people look bad because he wants to get even with everybody. He's Lester Bangs meets Dr. Doom. And if there's one thing Steve Gerber can do that works, it's combine two things that cannot combine and make them work. Lester Bangs, Dr. Doom, Dr. Bong. Oh my God. I love Dr. Bong more than I love Howard, to be honest, because it's so freaking audacious. It's one of those go big or go home moments. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And Steve Gerber, in the creation of Dr. Bong, embodied taking all those shots. I'm describing it, and I can't believe you actually got away with it. I'm pretty sure this will be the point where you pop up one of the pictures I sent you of Dr. Bong looking like Dr. Doom with a bell for a head. It's insane. And
This is why I love comics. This is why I love comics so much, because sometimes it's just so stupid and it just works.
Oh, I know. And that's why I just love being able to do this podcast, because now I'm completely inebriated talking about Dr. Bong versus Howard the Duck.
Cheers!
Cheers!
Virtual cheers.
So,
woo!
I'm trying to I think I'm past the halfway point, but I'm close. So, Howard the Duck.
Oh, good.
What did I cover here? Howard the Duck, social commentary, weirdness, Dr. Bong running for president. He meets Kiss. He joins the circus. Yeah, it was the 70s. That's all we can say. So
that is a 70s.
There's a Howard the Duck omnibus that I recommend anyone to read, or there's a black and white Marvel Masterworks, which is my primary way of reading all the old Howard the Duck comics. That still gets the whole point across. But anyway, it's great. It's great stuff. It is as good as comics in the 70s ever get, and it is so freaking weird. Now, as I mentioned before, Steve Gerber could not hit a deadline to save his life. Howard Mania got so big that around 1977, 1978, he gets a syndicated newspaper strip.
Yeah. Oh boy, that has a lot of
Blondie, High and Lois, Howard the Duck. Syndicated newspaper strip on the funny pages, and Gerber writes it. And I've only seen a few of them. I don't believe they've ever been collected. So if you want to read them, you have to find them online in really bad scans. And it's basically Gerber doing his Howard thing, but in 3 panels a day. And if you think the guy who can't hit a 22-page deadline every month is going to give you a good, an on-time 3-panel strip a day, no. Long story short, for a variety of reasons, Gerber is fired from all things Howard. There are controversies about that have many people on all different sides with different opinions. It's like trying to figure out who gets credit for Fantastic Four between Kirby and Lee. But the one thing that is certain is around 1979 or so. Steve Gerber gets fired from All Things Howard.
Drama.
A drama, and that's right at the time that Marvel, which was making a big push for magazine style comics at the time, like really big, oversized comics, not the newsprint style. And Howard the Duck was going to be one of the launch titles for that era. These giant, oversized comics, and Gerber was going to write them, and Gerber does not write them. A gentleman named Bill Mantlo, who is best known to all of us now as the creator of Rocket Raccoon, which, believe me, no one ever expected Bill Mantlo would become famous for having created Rocket Raccoon, but the 2010s are really weird. Bill Mantlo takes over the comic, and one of the first things he does, and I've sent you a scan too, you can pop up here, is apologize in the letters column for not being Steve Gerber. Because Howard the Duck was so utterly defined by being Steve Gerber's blog, his alternate identity. He is Gerber yelling at us in the form of a duck. So several issues of the Black and White magazine go through, and I will say I actually liked it a lot. Mantlo was not Gerber. Mantlo was better than he gets the reputation of. Mantlo, and I think Stephen Grant did 1 or 2 issues of Howard the Duck afterwards, where Howard the Duck becomes Iron Duck and fights Dr. Bong for the last time, etc., kind of wrapping up all the plot lines. And I think the people, for the situation they had to step into, the people writing Howard immediately after Steve Gerber did an amazing job for a completely thankless job. So, Stephen Grant, if you're watching this, I'm sorry if I'm even sound like I'm dissing you, because there was no way anyone could hit a home run coming out of the Steve Gerber run. But you all tried your best, and I have much respect for that. Now I know I'm drunk.
I think you sound very nice.
Say that again?
I think you sound very nice and very,
thank you.
Very kind.
I try to be a nice person when I have so many strong opinions. Now, right around this time is, as the saying goes, where things get a little weird. Believe it or not, we haven't gotten weird yet. We're about to get weird, because 2 major lawsuits happened right around this time. Actually, one's an almost lawsuit, one is a lawsuit. Number 1, Steve Gerber sues Marvel for ownership of Howard the Duck. Number 2, the Walt Disney Company sends a number of very threatening letters to Marvel about the fact that they think Howard the Duck is infringing on their Donald Duck copyright. All of this is happening not quite simultaneously, but within the same couple of years of each other, and shit gets a little bit crazy. Gerber's lawsuit is a whole, you could spend a whole podcast talking about that, and I would not be the one to talk about it, because I have what I would call a general understanding of that lawsuit. It was a landmark moment in creators' rights, because it was one of the very first times another Marvel creator sued to get control of the character they had made. And a lot of the contracts in the 60s and 70s were really vague as to what work for hire was and who actually owned these things. I was not there. I cannot say what happened. There are those who say that the Marvel checks required you, if you signed the check, you were signing a contract giving them rights to things. Others people say it wasn't that way. I wasn't there. I couldn't tell you. But the point was, Steve sued for ownership, and he believed he had a case, and it went to court. The fact that Jim Shooter was editor-in-chief of Marvel at this time and still speaks highly of Gerber's writing says a lot about Jim Shooter, by the way. I think Jim Shooter, he's a controversial figure in Marvel history himself. I think he's largely a stand-up guy who had to make a lot of tough calls that weren't very nice at times.
Right.
The long and short of all this is that Marvel and Gerber settled out of court. And there was a confidentiality agreement involved that Gerber never broke up until his death. We still do not know what was exactly in the terms of that lawsuit. But in general, Marvel maintained control of Howard the Duck. Right. When money was probably exchanged, who knows? But Steve was satisfied enough to drop the lawsuit, or at least he thought maybe he couldn't win. I don't know. The Walt Disney lawsuit, on the other hand, not so great. It didn't actually reach a lawsuit. There's a bunch of cease and desist letters, and Marvel basically knuckled under on this one. And they allowed the Disney company to redesign Howard the Duck. And after Disney is done redesigning Howard the Duck, he is a very different duck. I mentioned before, he's no longer like I said, he was big. To be fair, I can see how they thought he was infringing on the Donald Duck thing, because he was very similar to Donald Duck. walked like a duck, had the duck-shaped body. He wore a jacket and a hat. When Disney was done redesigning him and Marvel took over, accepted these rules, Howard the Duck was now a humanoid duck-like figure. He stood up straight. He was a little bit taller. He wore pants. He and once again, that I've sent you a couple pictures of how the duck looked like after that, and he was more like an anthropomorphic duck. He was more like Mickey Mouse in structure than Donald Duck. And by this point, Steve was so far out of things he had no chance to stop it. He'd already given up the rights, etc. On a side note, I hope someday we will see this resolved, because Disney now owns Howard the Duck outright. They can do whatever they want with them. They can undo this stuff. There's a piece of Howard the Duck merchandise I wish I'd bought, and maybe someday I will find it on eBay for the right price. Marvel Legends action figures around 1998. Silver Surfer figure comes out with a Howard the Duck accessory. Why is Howard the Duck packaged with Silver Surfer? I don't know. But it's Howard the Duck with the Silver Surfer, maybe because of the cosmic thing. That doesn't make sense. More importantly, it's original Howard. This is 15 years after the lawsuit, but he is duck-like, no-pants Howard. I do not know how they got away with that. I don't know if someone slipped something under the radar, or if someone managed to just wasn't paying attention and used an old picture of Howard in licensing, because once again, this is 15 years later with a very obscure character. Maybe no one cared. And that one got pulled off the market eventually. Never got rid of it. I see that figure. I see it every so often, like $30. I'm like, I should pay that. It's a little plastic Howard figurine. It's not very big. It's like the size of the dogs that would come with G.I. Joe figures who had dogs of their own. He's just a little no action accessory. But it's Howard the Duck without the pants in 1998, which is kind of awesome.